Good evening. I'm Dr. Fred Rouse. It's currently, where are we at here? 7 o'clock exactly on July 13th. I'm a real money doctor, and I wanted to touch base on today's events that affect the way you get, protect, and enjoy your money, your life, and your retirement. Now, the question for today is, can you still retire? And I'm going to get to that in a few minutes, but that's a really important question, especially with everything that's been going on here. So we start every day. We've been doing this since March, basically. As the number of COVID cases, to see just where we're at, because that's the biggest thing that's really affecting the world and the U.S. at this point in time, more than just about anything else. I can't think of anything that really affects it more than the COVID situation. So right now, coming off the weekend, we're at 3,346,000 cases. That's up another 182.7 thousand cases since Friday. Now, of the total cases, okay, about 30% have actually recovered, which is just about where we were before. And that's what's going on right now. So if you're diagnosed, you got about a 30% chance of actually recovering at some reasonable time. Now, of all the cases, of that 3,346,000 cases, 4.05% have died. So right now, the current deaths are 135,547. That's up 1,700 since Friday when we last spoke. Again, you get a 4% chance of actually dying. And there are people still, to this day, blowing this entire thing off. They're all over Facebook. Drinking the Kool-Aid, wearing the tinfoil hats, they can't help themselves. I understand, it's okay. However, when it affects you personally, a friend, a relative, a neighbor, a coworker is affected by COVID, all of a sudden, the tune starts to change just a little bit. And all of a sudden, the Kool-Aid gets dumped, the tinfoil hat comes off, and they come back into reality. Now, New York has the first highest number of cases. They still do, at 402,000 cases for the state. And they're up 1.9 thousand cases since Friday. Their deaths right now are at 32,390. That's 83 over the weekend. Now, I've been told, I haven't seen the numbers yet, that for yesterday, for Sunday, they had 0 deaths. Don't know if that's a reporting thing or they just got lucky or things finally dropped into place for them after all the hard work they've done and everything they've put up with. But I've been told, I haven't been able to verify it just yet, but I've been told that over the weekend, over Sunday, New York State just had 0 deaths, which is pretty impressive. Now, California's taking the number 2 spot, almost 2, maybe 3 weeks right now. Right now, they're at 326,000 cases, another 23,000 cases since Friday. Now, they are at currently 7,053 deaths. That's up another 191 deaths since Friday. So, again, depending on where you're at, if you're in a neighborhood that nobody's been affected, hey, congratulations. But not everybody's been quite that lucky. Now, Florida has got the number 3 spot. We'll be talking about Florida some more. Interesting things going on in Florida. Texas has got the number 4 spot. Okay, Florida and Texas have moved up this past week and a half or so. New Jersey's at number 5. Illinois stays at number 6. Arizona has moved up to number 7 about the middle of last week. And interesting things are happening there also. Georgia's at number 8. Massachusetts at number 9. And Pennsylvania has dropped down to number 10. Now, yesterday, Sunday, Florida reported a record 15,300 new cases, the most of any state in any single day. It's really, really an amazingly dismal sign of the United States' failure to control this pandemic after about 6 months since the first infection actually surfaced in this country. Again, this is part of the routine where if it doesn't affect you directly on day number 1, you tend to blow it off. Depending on what news station you're listening to, you tend to blow it off. The people who don't blow it off are people in the front lines in the actual hospitals. Now, That staggering number was the result of both increased testing, okay, and widespread community transmission. Now, this really affected the entire state's population centers, as well as its rural areas. It shattered previous highs of 11,694 reported by California last week and 11,571 reported by New York back in April 15, when New York State was going absolutely crazy, okay, with rented refrigerated trucks outside of hospitals for makeshift morgues. At that point in time, 11,571 cases, okay, back in April 15th. Florida has bypassed that number considerably. Now, the surge in cases came even as Disney World in Orlando decided to reopen Saturday, having been shuttered for nearly 4 months. Now, nationally, the conversation over reopening has really become increasingly fraught amid soaring case numbers, with much of the debate centering on whether schools should really open their doors in fall or not. On Sunday morning news shows, Trump administration officials continued to give mixed messages, with Education Secretary Betsy DeVos advocating for schools to reopen, and Admiral Brett Gore, the Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services, cautioning that it's too early to open safely. Now, the latest spikes put Florida at the center of the country's faltering pandemic response, highlighting the ongoing struggle of the state governments to try and gain an edge on a virus, while the White House continues to maintain a largely hands-off approach, and they've been doing it since it got started. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. Okay. They mentioned it, and now all of a sudden, last week or two, you don't hear the president talking about the virus at all. He's just ignoring it. It's dropped from his conversation. Like if you don't talk about it, it's going to go away. It's not. What a surprise. Now, the situation in California is also very serious, and California and Texas were both. Officials on Sunday reported record 7-day averages for new cases. 8,664 in California, 9,060 in Texas. Healthcare workers in both states are facing an influx of COVID-19 patients. The 7-day average for cases nationwide, considered a more reliable indicator than the virus's impact on a single day total, has really risen 165% over the last month. The country's daily death toll has also increased last week after months of decline. Now, the influx of coronavirus patients is really straining Florida's hospitals, and the related deaths in the state are really trending upward after leveling off in the late spring. Again, they weren't getting hit that badly. It wasn't their time. It didn't get there yet. And everybody knew from day number one that it was going to be moving across the country, and the peak of the events was going to be different for each state. It happened to peak in a New York State first. But, okay, everybody was poo-pooing lockdowns, all make-believe, and it's overreaction. Well, New York has got this under control. And the states that decide to reopen, they're getting hit right now. Now, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has really stuck to an aggressive reopening plan. The state officials recently ordered schools to reopen 5 days a week in the new academic year, drawing objections from actual local leaders. The state is also set to hold a National Republican Conference next month in Jacksonville. They have an indoor facility that seats over 15,000. And shortly before Florida announced the new cases, Betsy DeVos made the rounds on Sunday on the talk shows, where she continued to urge schools to reopen. In an interview on CNN, State of the Union, she said she'd like to see closed schools be the exception rather than the norm. Asked about the surging caseloads across the country, she replied that schools could respond to little flare-ups, in the future, but they should just generally be open for full-time learning. That's what she said. When asked if they had a plan, she didn't have a plan. What a surprise. Now, the 7-day averages for new cases hit new highs in Alabama, in Florida, Mississippi, Montana, North Carolina, Oklahoma, and Puerto Rico. Deaths were trending sharply up in nearly every major region of the country. Testing, meanwhile, is really slowing nationwide after increasing throughout the spring. About 4.6 million diagnostic tests were administered in the U.S. in the last week, compared to 4.5 million from the previous week. So there's no big rush in the testing right now. Again, remember the president said, slow down the testing. Every state right now, they're trying to get more tests because they're getting swamped with cases. 13, 15-hour waits in lines trying to get tested. Once they do get tested, if they get the lucky to be able to get a test, 5, 7, 8 days or so before they get results. Not much help. Nothing, okay, is going to happen in those 8 days with contact tracing. It's a disaster at this point in time. It doesn't exist. It's only on the state levels. There's nothing on the federal level, which really brings me to the question for the day is, can you still retire? Now, you may have not heard, but United Airlines announced plans to lay off more than 1/3 of its 95,000 workers. Brooks Brothers, which first opened for business back in 1818, filed for bankruptcy. Bed Bath & Beyond said it was going to close 200 stores. Now, if there were still any fantasy hopes of a V-shaped comeback from the COVID shutdown, this past week really should have put an end to all that nonsense. It's not happening. Now, the initial pandemic shock, the economists once really assumed would just be a temporary business interruption, appears now instead to be settling into a traditional, self-perpetuating recession. I told you about this stuff before. There is no V-shaped recovery. Now, when states and cities began closing for most businesses in March, the idea was, to seriously slow down the virus and give everybody time for the medical system to really catch up. They were really concerned that the hospitals, again, New York City particularly, were going to get overloaded with patients. And they were screaming for ventilators, screaming for more hospital beds. The hospital staff, in many hospitals, burned out. And they weren't supposed to be seeing, on a shift, 5, 8, 10 people dying on a shift. It's not good for your mental health. But these frontline workers did that. And in parts of the country where they didn't see any of this stuff, it was all make-believe. It was all a hoax. People trying to scare you into complying with something or other. Well, if you were on a front line in an emergency room or an ICU, in New York City or New York State, you knew a whole lot different. But there is actually no communicating that to someone who doesn't want to hear about reality. The only reality they know is what they happen to see within 5, 6 feet of them. And if there's nobody with cases, it doesn't exist. It's existing now. Now, President Trump on July 2nd said that the June employment numbers, he was just thrilled to death. He proves that it proves that our economy is roaring back. He had one jobs report on July 2nd, and he just jumped on that thing that, it's coming back, no problems at all. Well, what a surprise. As the COVID cases continue to rise in the U.S., this is not a happy situation. Now, but without a uniform federal strategy, many governors rushed to reopen their economies before bringing the virus really under control. Now, states such as Florida, California, Texas, Arizona are setting daily records for coronavirus cases. And more than 70% of the country has either paused or actually reversed their reopening plans. That's according to Goldman Sachs. Now, after 2 surprisingly strong months, the economy could be shedding more jobs again this month and in August. That's what Morgan Stanley was warning about. Many small businesses that received forgivable government loans, they've exhausted those funds. And while some of our larger companies are starting to thin their payrolls in preparation for a longer than expected downturn, fresh labor market weakness would represent a profound disappointment for millions of American workers and President Trump, who was really eager to highlight the economic progress with only a few months remaining before the November election. Economic progress is not about to happen that quickly. Now, reopening efforts stalled in Houston as COVID-19 cases just spiked there. Texas was one of the first states to ease their lockdown restrictions, but a resurgence of cases has really caused reopening efforts to just stall completely. Several regional Federal Reserve officials last week expressed concerns about the recovery just petering out completely. The White House on Friday, the president insisted that his plans were on track. He said, "I created the greatest economy we've ever had, and now we're creating it again." He said that before he left Florida. A day earlier, he told a group of Hispanic leaders that he launched the fastest economic comeback in history. And what he's hanging hat on is that one jobs report. Yes, the economy did regain a total of 7.5 million jobs in May and June. That sounds really, really phenomenal. It was faster than any of the economists actually anticipated. But what nobody ever mentioned to you was that that was just really 1/3 of the actual numbers that lost their job to the pandemic to begin with. So there's no major recovery happening here, folks. Now, in a sign of the times, more than 2 months after states like Georgia lifted their shelter-in-place orders, layoffs are spreading beyond the companies that provided services requiring, direct human contact. Harley-Davidson last week said it was eliminating 700 jobs as part of its restructuring plan, as it, described it was unrelated to the fallout from the pandemic. Now, the pandemic, which marked an abrupt end to nearly 11 years of expansion, is really prompting companies to rethink their operations and that trim the fat that accumulated while the economy was really growing relatively well. Wells Fargo, the nation's fourth largest bank, is drawing up plans to cut tens of thousands of jobs later this year, according to Bloomberg News. They keep track of what happened with Wells Fargo, trust me. Now, the chief economic advisor at Allianz said, while the timing seems to coincide with the stalling of the economic reopening process in over 30 states, there may well be something more strategic in play right now. Pressures on a growing segment of the corporate America to right size for what increasingly looks like a longer road back to full economic recovery. Now, the unemployment rate never really reached the depression level numbers of 20% that many economists were really worried about in March. It did, however, top out at 14.7% so far. But the layoffs that were initially described as just temporary, due to the health crisis, are right now hardening into something considerably more permanent, leaving millions of workers scrambling to regain a footing in a really totally changed economy. First-time job claims for unemployment benefits have exceeded the previous unheard of number of 1 million for 16 consecutive weeks. A new program for freelancers and gig economy workers was also affected by the pandemic. Weekly claims are rising. Almost 33 million Americans are now collecting some form of unemployment benefits, according to Morgan Stanley. Now, even allowing for some double counting of the figures, that means nearly 20% of those who were working in February are jobless right now. There will be fewer jobs in airlines, hotels, restaurants, and traditional retail, and more in e-commerce and technology industries. Shifting workers from fading industries to a handful that are experiencing rising sales will not happen quickly. During the Great Recession, which began back in December 2007, it took nearly 10 years for unemployment rates to fall back to 4.4%. Levi Strauss, booming online sales were not enough to offset the impact of the closure of most of its retail outlets in March and April. The company said last week it would lay off 700 workers, aiming to trim quarterly expenses by over $100 million. Businesses are being conservative and cautious and resize their businesses for the worst case scenario of that economy that just might not bounce back. What we're now seeing is a normal recession dynamics that most people are really trying to avoid. As the virus has ranged longer than really first expected, some companies are concluding that they just don't see a need for as many workers as they did in February. Millions of additional layoffs could come from the soon cash-strapped states and local governments, unless Congress really provides some additional relief for small businesses that have really exhausted their borrowing power under the Paycheck Protection Program. Right now, as owners are finishing up their loan money, more find that the economic conditions are unable to support the current staffing levels, which previously were supported by the PPP loans. What a surprise. None of this means that the economy is destined to repeat its disastrous March plunge. However, many economists, though, think it's going to be a stop-and-go recovery that will advance the retreat depending on public health. Again, from day one, we knew that this was a public health issue, it was an economic issue. Once the public health situation is under control, the economy will get back to normal. But if people keep blowing off the public health situation, the social distancing and the masks, it's not going to get back to normal anytime soon. Now, nowhere is that clearer than the doubts whether schools are going to actually reopen this fall or not. The president insists that the nation has no choice but to resume instruction for millions of students, both for their benefit and to enable parents to return to their jobs, which is really his only real concern. But with coronavirus cases soaring just weeks before the first bells are scheduled to ring, it's not really clear whether that's going to be practical or not. So the question really remains, can you still retire? The economy is changing. Sometimes, like now, sometimes it's faster, sometimes it's not. But it's always changing, and it's always in more than unexpected ways. You just don't know what's happening. You have no control over those things. There's no doubt that some people are going to go under. Absolutely no doubt at all. They were already on shaky ground before all these things actually started to happen at all. And they knew that. However, there's another group of people, the regular middle class, upper middle class working folks that were sort of on track and managed over the years to put a little bit of money off to the side. They thought they might be close to okay, but they always had this lingering worry that they weren't just not 100% certain that they'd really have enough money. And they always worry about the next market crash. And they had heard that they would live through at least 2 market crashes while they're actually in retirement. And they were right, because that's about how it works out. Now, they may have had close to $1 million, or they may have had as little as $10,000 before all those things got started. They had a good idea what their final outcome was that they actually wanted. They wanted a normal car and a house, some money for travel, nothing extra, just some money to be able to spoil the grandkids just a little bit. They wanted a reasonable retirement without having to worry about money or having to cut back on their lifestyle. If that's you, then yes, you can retire. I can assure you that you can still retire and do those things. However, in order to make that happen, you'll need to make some minor changes in what you've been doing. Because retirement is much, much more a mind game as is a money game. There are tons of things not under your control. And yes, the system is stacked against you in favor of the 2% at the top. However, once you start to understand how both the mind and money game are played together and how you can get both under your control, then you'll know for certain that you can get and enjoy the retirement you actually want and deserve and have the option of having it in just the next 3 to 5 years. Now, I'm Dr. Fred Rouse, the Real Money Doctor. My only goal is to help you to get, protect, and enjoy your money, your life, and your retirement. Now, I'd like to be able to show you how to win both the mind and the money game that will allow you to do just that. Once you have both the mind and money game of retirement under your control, you will have the option to be able to retire in the next 3 to 5 years with the cash flow that you'll need to maintain the lifestyle that you'll want and deserve without ever having to worry about a job or money again. So go to my site, drrouthnow.com. Take a look. There's a 12-minute video there. See if it makes sense for you. If it does, let me know. You can't buy anything on the site. Okay? I'm asking you to look at the video, let me know, schedule a call, and we can chat. You can't buy anything on the call either. But go to drrouthnow.com. Take a peek. See if it makes sense. Let me know. Again, I appreciate spending some time with you tonight. I look forward to spending with some time again tomorrow around 7 o'clock. Thank you.